What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Behind the Facade. I am your host, Gavin J. Gallagher, and on this podcast I explore the mental and emotional game often playing out subconsciously in your mind and the mind of everyone else in the real estate or property investment market. The key to success in this game is to master your mindset, your behavior, to take control of your thoughts, your emotions, and most importantly, your ego. So here we are on episode 71. Last week I was talking about property taxes, and this week I'm going to be taking a look at innovation in the property industry. Now, digital transformation has been impacting every single sector, and real estate is absolutely no exception. So I got to ask you the question, are you actively looking to remove friction from your business, from your portfolio, from finding tenants, whatever it might be? It's something that you should look at, because I think if you just take a look at other industries and how they've been impacted. First of all, banks. Banks have been massively impacted by fintech. It used to be that you had to go to the bank and the bank would only open from 10 to 4, certainly in this country. And you would stand in line and you would do all this kind of stuff. Now you pop out your phone, you transfer money instantly, you do all this stuff. Banks have really been feeling the pain and the pinch from that. It's the same with the taxi industry. If you have a look at the taxi industry, it used to be that you bought yourself a taxi plate, you'd paid a lot of money for it, but then you were basically in the club and you had little or no competition. You had people queuing. I can remember when I was finishing college as a young guy, walking out, going out in the evenings and stuff, and you would be looking at an hour maybe standing in a line for a taxi after the nightclub closed or whatever. Just complete, ridiculous situation. And nowadays we have, back in those days, they didn't take credit cards. They wanted it to be cash. If you were, handing over, if it came to £17 or €17, whatever, and you handed over 20, often the guy wouldn't have any change, and he'd be kind of expecting you to say, okay, keep the change. And so along comes Uber, along comes these, companies like Halo or whoever it was that has disrupted certain markets. And they come along, make it as frictionless as possible, make it as convenient as possible. You want to pay with a credit card? No problem. You want to get out of the car without even having to talk to the driver? No problem. You can do that. Just set your card up on your phone. All of that is the kind of topic I'm getting into today. It's making it as efficient and friction-free as possible. And so my guest this week is Robert Hoban. Now, Robert is the founder and CEO of a prop tech firm called Offer, and that's spelled OFFR. And if you're looking for it on the website, it'll be OFFR.io. And I'm going to put links into the show notes. But Offer is growing across the UK and Ireland. It's an Irish firm started by Robert, and it's now starting actually to look at other markets, including the US. And as you'll hear in this podcast, myself and Robert, we actually mentioned Duke Long, who was in, I think, episode 28 of the podcast. So I'll be putting a link in to Duke as well, because he gets a mention in today's podcast. Now, Robert has a wealth of experience in this industry, having previously held the role of managing director at another prop tech firm called BidX1. Now, BidX1 is still, doing great things. It's a digital property marketplace, and it is active across the UK, Ireland, Spain, Cyprus, Greece, and now South Africa. Prior to that, Robert was the commercial director of Allsop's Ireland, or Allsop Ireland, which introduced the property auctions that it became kind of famous for in the Irish market after the big crash of 2008. And Robert's going to go into the history of that and how he got involved and how he ended up he was number 3 in that company when it started, and where they ended up doing 250 auctions. They ended up selling 250 properties in a single day between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. That's one every 3 minutes. And they just went on to enormous success. The first time they did it, 2,500 people showed up for the auction. And so there's a ton of valuable insights for anyone who is looking to either invest in property or with any ambition to actually go out there and disrupt the status quo by, doing something innovative and disruptive in the industry. So without further ado, my conversation with Mr. Robert Hoban. Robert, you're most welcome. How are you doing?
Thanks, Gavin. Delighted to be here. Looking forward to a chat.
You're in Dublin today, yeah?
I'm in Dublin, yeah. Although I'm every 2 or 3 weeks, I'm over and back to London, sort of. So as we emerge from our cocoon, I've been dividing my time between the UK and here as we try to get the business off the ground over there. So it's been an interesting time.
I imagine, yeah, airports and all that. The I'm going to go into your company, your startup that you're working on at the moment. I'm also going to go into the previous companies that you've been involved in, but I'd like to take you back to the beginning, back to young Robert, emerging out of university and thinking that he might like to get involved in the property industry. Can you tell us, like, what was the catalyst? Because I was doing a little bit of research and I checked your LinkedIn, and I see you have an electrical engineering degree from UCD and a law degree from DIT, and that is not the typical sort of education that when I speak to a lot of people who are in the property industry. Usually, it's property economics or it's something like that. So, tell us what kind of brought you into the property industry.
Yeah, well, I suppose like a lot of people leaving school, I hadn't a clue what I wanted to do, even after I'd done the leaving cert, so I had various interests. And actually, I went to UCD and I studied 3 years of electrical electronic engineering, but actually, I didn't finish that degree. That's how I ended up going into the law degree years later. So excuse me, I was interested, loved science and mathematics and the principles of physics. Um, but when I was going through my third year in engineering, and I don't know, I wasn't loving it at the time, and I ended up working for the summer in property, and I ended up not going back to college. And I enjoyed that. I started working for what was Hamilton Osborne King, HOK, if anyone remembers.
Mm.
They became Savills years later, and I was in the country homes and estates division. So it was selling farms and stud farms and lovely period houses up and down the country. And I love kind of the country life, and I'm into my horses and things like that. So it was kind of home from home. So that's how I ended up going into property. Then it was a somewhat serendipitous venture. It was through a family friend, Pat O'Hagan, who was head of country homes there, that I did a kind of a summer job there and ended up staying. And so then it was years later, when I was in my 30s, that I went back to college at night and I did a law degree in DIT. It was something that I always wanted to complete, as in, complete a third level qualification, but equally, it was an area that fascinated me. And having already had a partial career through property, you deal with a lot of legal things, and you touch on the law a lot, and you have to understand property law, contract law, commercial law from a very amateur perspective. So I decided to give that a go, and I didn't practice law or anything like that. I was director of Allsop at the time. I had plenty to be doing, but it was certainly very interesting.
Yeah, I can relate actually, because studying architecture as I did, there is actually kind of a component of law that you actually have to learn. And there was actually I think probably third, fourth, and fifth year, there was a whole law sort of side to it where you had to do contract law and all that kind of stuff. So I can remember being kind of interested in it, but not interested enough to go and pursue any kind of a degree in it. That's for sure. In terms of just, I mean, it's so interesting how you've gone now down the path of property, or of prop tech, I guess is the word. And it's, that is a kind of a particular skill set and stuff like that. But looking at, the career, a couple of years in the country department of HOK and Savills and stuff like that. I mean, what sort of pulled you into the Allsop Ireland role that you eventually ended up in?
Yeah, well, I was actually, it was the best part of a decade nearly in HOK slash Savills. So I was 30 when I left Savills. The crash had happened, it started to happen a year or two prior to that, and I was introduced to Stephen McCarthy, who's an Irish entrepreneur, um, former property developer and general property investor, and he had the idea to create auctions in Ireland because he had a good sense that there was going to be a lot of property coming to the market that needed to be sold quickly, as a result of the crash. So he was introduced to me by Rowena Quinn, a mutual friend. Rowena is a former colleague of mine, and Rowena heads up Hunter's estate agent.
I know Rowena, yes.
Yeah, and so Stephen was looking for someone from within the property industry to join him to help set this up, and he already had Jonathan Fenn with them, who is director of BidX1 now, because it became BidX1. So the three of us set up our little team, and we started, and we had a sort of a loose agreement, a gentleman's agreement, you might say, with Allsop in London to create a proof of concept here, which was the first Allsop auction on the 15th of April 2011 in the Shelburne Hotel. And, after a year, more than a year of work and false starts and false dawns, we got our first auction off the ground. We sold 81 out of 82 properties that day. And I remember there's
Wow.
2,500 people turned up to Stephen's Green trying to get into the Shelburne Hotel. And we've got all sorts of global coverage at the time. There was CNN, there was Sky News, there was
Really? Wow.
Australian Broadcasting Corporation, there was BBC World Service. It was headline news at the time. But an awful lot of work went into it behind the scenes. I mean, I remember when I first met Steve, I was sitting in his office and he told me the idea he had, and I thought it sounded brilliant. And I said, I'd love to do it. So I had left Savills and I started with Steve. But I remember he was saying, look, give this a go for 3 months, see if we have an opportunity. And look, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Shake hands, and we'll find something else to do. And if it does work, who knows what it might become. But that 3 months turned into nearly a year and a half before we got it off the ground, because
wow,
it was a big change. It was a big new thing to bring to the market, a big new idea. But also at the time, we had sort of assumed that there would be an instant appetite for this amongst, say, the banks and the funds that needed to sell properties. But actually, because the prices had skyrocketed so high, pre-2009, the real underlying value was a lot less than that. So there was a reluctance to set a floor, you might say, to find out where the actual value is, because then those values have to be applied across huge books.
Yeah.
So it took a long time, and thankfully, when we had our first auction, the prices that were achieved were actually well above the reserve prices at the time. But that sparked then a whole new business. Allsop Ireland became quite an established name. We grew the team to 20 or 30 people, generating solid revenues with 6 big auctions a year. I mean, on the auction day itself, it would start at 9 o'clock in the morning and would continue till 6 o'clock in the evening, and the hammer would come down every 3 minutes. I mean,
every 3 minutes.
Every 3 minutes, the gavel would come down. Yeah, the same gavel that I have here.
Oh wow, yeah.
Jonathan gave to me my name engraved on it when I stood up to the rostrum, because first few auctions it was Gary Murphy and Chris Berryman from London, Allsop London, and then I joined the auction team, and then the three of us were conducting the auctions. I would take the middle shift from sort of 12 to 3 and get through about 80 properties sold. So we moved to the RDS then, because the Shelburne was it was a fantastic fantastic venue, but the location was not ideal for people coming from all parts of the country and needing parking and things like that. So we moved to the RDS. And
in terms of the numbers, I mean, 2,500 people the first time. Was it like that every time, or the Shelburne can't take that kind of?
No, I think the capacity is 700. I think in the grand ballroom that they have there.
Right.
So actually, an interesting one on that day itself. We had all these people coming, but the vast majority were there to observe and to watch. And I think half the estate agents in Ireland turned up as well to see what was going on and would these properties sell, because, agents had properties on their books for the previous couple of years that weren't shifting, understandably. I mean, the market had changed overnight. So what we had to do was we had obviously a lot of people there to bid as well. So we had to restrict entry just to those with either checkbooks or credit cards or some evidence that they were going to pay the deposit. And we did a quick live feed to Donny Nesbitt's up the street, and this was at 11 o'clock in the morning. And so anyone who just wanted to observe could go down to Donny Nesbitt's, and they had them all up on the big screen showing the auction. And so all the patrons went in and ordered their tea and coffee. I think Donny sold more tea and coffee than they've ever sold in that 2-hour period when things kicked off. And I remember there was an outside broadcast of Sky News and filming inside the pub, and it was along the tone of sort of here we are in Ireland, whereby there's a huge recession has been caused by the crash of the property market and over speculation, And in the local pub here in Dublin, instead of everybody watching the football, they're all watching a property auction taking place next door. And it was a sort of a kind of a will they ever learn type thing, And that was, went on. That auction went on to, God, it was 5 p.m. But no, after that it would be about 1,000 people. 600 to 1,000 people would attend on a given day. But there was, dozens and dozens of other bodies involved as regards lawyers in the legal room. We had our staff, we had catering, we had security, we had all sorts of things. So it was a big, big affair. And it was that then that actually prompted us to be looking at potential online solutions, because it was a hugely costly affair to put on.
Yeah.
Very professionally done, I'd like to think, but it was still very costly as a result of it being done well. So that was when we started experimenting with online technology, and we started running small online auctions in between the big physical ones. And they proved very, very popular. They proved very efficient. And indeed, so much so that they started to supersede the physical auctions.
Right.
even with my good self on the rostrum, I couldn't compete with the automated version of me. We transitioned then very quickly into a pure online auction company. So Allsop Ireland then went from a physical auction to an online auction, but it was still called Allsop Ireland.
Right.
And when it went totally online.
And I mean, with 1,000 people, coming into each one, I remember you would charge, I think it was a registration fee or something like that. That must have been something that kind of generated a few, like 50,000. It would have covered some of the costs or something like that.
Yeah, we had to try to kind of recoup some of the costs of hosting the event. And so we introduced a charge of €50 to attend. But you could bid on as many lots as you wanted once that was in. But it was also a way of kind of managing the numbers and things like that. So
keeping the gawkers out.
Yeah, I suppose we wanted to make sure everyone who was there to buy had a seat. So that was, but there was genuinely, we were surprised, or pleasantly surprised, that there was no real resistance to that. These are people coming who wanted, to buy a property. They were there to do business. If it meant that they could do so in comfort and with space and access to professional services, it didn't become much of an issue. And then when we went online, it was a slightly different story, because with online auctions, because the bidder ultimately becoming the buyer is not physically there to come up and hand you the money for the deposit. You have to take a pre-registration deposit online, like a bidder security, which could be anything depending on the size of the value of the property, but typically, sort of €4,000 or €5,000, which is done by pre-authorized online card payment, which is released if you're unsuccessful. So that we didn't have to do that in the physical auction, but we had to do that in the online auction. But it became very popular. I mean, to give you an example, and this ultimately is what sort of started my mind thinking about where else this could be used, was there was one period whereby 1 month in September, oh God, I'm going to get this wrong, but I think it was around 2016, whereby we had one big physical auction and one big online auction in the same month. So we had 200 lots in the physical auction and 200 lots in the online auction, which was 2 weeks later, all very similar mix of property types and mix of locations and similar values. So, nothing really to differentiate the catalogs. So we did the physical auction, and we, at that stage, we didn't have so many spectators. They were all bidders. So our crowds were down to maybe about 300 to 400 people, but all there to bid. We had a very successful day, 80% thereabouts sold, and about maybe 25% over reserve price was the average. And by all accounts, a very, very, normal, successful day. 2 weeks later, we had our first big online auction. And on the morning of the auction, about an hour before the first lot was due to go live, there was 1,000 registered bidders, each having processed €5,000 prepayment on their card from all over the world, from all over Ireland, from all over the UK, from all over the world.
That's 5 million or something, is it?
Yeah, on pre-auths now. It was all just, holes put on accounts, like when you go to book a hotel room,
Sure.
So, but I mean, what a vindication of an online process. So any sense that, going online would in any way somehow inhibit or reduce was quite the opposite. In fact, it actually opened up the market. So when you have 3 times the number of bidders per property, you are naturally going to have a higher success rate. So the success rate was something closer to 90% that day. And we had a higher percentage over reserve. I think it was closer to 35% over reserve as opposed to 25%, which was we had got 2 weeks prior. So that for us at the time was a big turning point. We knew then that there was a real future in this. And from talking to buyers, as you would naturally talk to over the weeks and months, it became very clear that there was two major benefits or things that appealed to them. One was that it was much more convenient. It was considered more convenient. Oh, I'm on holiday that week, or I'm on on a work trip, or I'm very busy that day. I can still participate. And the second thing was the anonymity of it, the protection, the privacy, the confidentiality, the idea that you're not in the full glare of 100 other people who might be interested in the same property, and it's less intimidating. And so therefore, people felt more comfortable. They're bidding from the comfort of their own home, behind their own laptop screen or their own mobile phone. So that combination was quite a heady cocktail that produced better and faster results. So within a few months, the entire physical auction at the time went online from the following January onwards.
And tell me, in terms of just the format of it, was it the same, yourself standing in front of a camera now with a gavel, or was it, kind of you register kind of a bid or something like that?
No, it wasn't a hybrid model at all. It was pure online. I mean, it was a sort of a glib way of describing it would be eBay for property, right, whereby it was completely automated, completely online. But we had a full team, the entire team of surveyors who had been marketing the properties and dealing with the buyers and the inquiries for the previous month and physically showing the properties. There sometimes is a myth that if it's an online sale, people must not be able to see the properties. You can still go and visit the properties prior to the auction.
Right. So there was as much pre-work involved. Yeah.
Yeah, and the contracts were all being prepared by the lawyers acting for the various vendors, but they're all being uploaded into a virtual data room instead of being available like we used to have in big brown envelopes that used to sit in boxes. So when you went into the RDS, there was a big legal documents room, and you had these big cardboard boxes with huge big A3 envelopes, brown envelopes, each one with a legal pack printed out and a contract for sale and title deeds and all that sort of stuff. That was all went online. So it was, there was no auctioneer broadcasting as such, and people were very happy with that. So it would close it used to be every 5 minutes, then we brought it down to every 3, and then we brought it down to every 2. Now I left 4 years ago, so I'm not sure what the interval is now, but it was down to every 2 minutes at one stage that each lot would close.
And at that stage, I mean, the nice thing as well, just when you're talking about the anonymity and the convenience, I think there's a transparency about it as well, that you can see your bid there, and then oh crap, somebody's like bid beyond me, as opposed to these kind of, people always had these suspicions that there was somebody in the room that wasn't actually serious, but he was kind of like trying to pump up the price or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're dead right. Now, I mean, there's a certain amount of transparency in an auction, generally anyway, in the concept of an auction, in that you can see people putting their hands up. But as you say, unless you're sitting in the very back row, you're not going to see everybody in the room. So you don't really know for sure. But whereas in an online version, everything is recorded, it's permanent record, dated and timestamped. The evidence is there behind the scenes that such and such a person registered and bid with their ID. There's IP addresses, there's email addresses, there's all sorts of things that you wouldn't get with a traditional auction. And you're right, and that it will appeal more and more, and it is going to continue that way. As the next generation of buyers keep coming through, they're going to want to do more and more of it on their own phone, self-service, not having to be talk to someone every step of the way.
It's the removal of friction, really, isn't that it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it still keeps the human advisory side of things, and I suppose that then was what brought me on to me ultimately leaving 4 years ago, and I left a job I loved and a great bunch of people, and BidX1 has gone on to some fantastic things now in several different countries. So it's a real Irish success story. At this stage, by the way, the company had changed name from Allsop to BidX1.
Yeah, I remember seeing that around.
So the shareholders did a deal whereby Allsop sold their 50% of shares to the company, and so therefore obviously the name Allsop was no longer associated, so it became BidX1. But we were running some interesting sort of trials with some agents that were interested in the bidding technology to see could it help speed up the closing of traditional sales. So auction is a very powerful method of sale, and it's very becoming more and more popular, but it's still quite niche. Less than 5% of properties in most countries sell by way of auction. The other 95% are all sold by way of what they call private treaty, which is a sort of a semi-legal and an industry term. But for the average person, what that just means is it's open to offers.
Yeah.
Effectively, is what that means.
And the agent brokers them or whatever. Yeah.
The agent brokers them, but it also means that you have conditional offers. So you might have three people placing an offer, but all three of them are totally different. Some are subject to finance, subject to the sale of the property. Others might be totally cash, and others might be able to close tomorrow. Others might not be able to close for another 5 months. So every offer is different, you might say, and every buyer is different. So some of our clients at the time were interested in finding a way to speed up the traditional sale process by maybe introducing some online bidding processes. So we managed to successfully get some really good deals over the line, working with some great agent brands in Ireland. But it struggled a little bit. I suppose that the main bits of feedback coming back were, that the bidding was still auction. It was still unconditional. There wasn't any conditionality to it. So, and it also meant that they also always had to sell to the highest bidder, whereas in a private treaty case, there's more negotiations and with the ability to choose an offer from a buyer that may be a better offer, not because of the monetary amount, but because of the conditions or lack thereof conditions attached to the offer. So that's when I realized, there's a potential market here for a more flexible solution that's an independent technology that is built purely as a software, just purely software as a service. That this can then be integrated and dropped into agents' businesses very, very easily and very quickly, and allow them to conduct digital sales of not just auction, but private treaty. And then also we've grown into other areas like new homes and lettings and things like that, which are on the roadmap. So I made the plunge 4 years ago, and
I can remember you and I met for a coffee in October 2018, and you had only just literally kicked off the business at that stage. It was still kind of very early, wasn't it?
I had so it was in August 2017, but I had spent a long time trying to map it out and decide how I was going to do this, and meet the right people, and introduce two co-founders, which I did over time over the next 12 months. But I decided. I remember I met with Steve in his office, and I said, "Listen, I think, give this a go, whatever." And in fairness, he was very supportive. So I kind of had to move back into the mother's house, save on the rent, and I rented
bootstrap.
Oh, you've no idea. I had to figure out for the first time I left how to really properly bootstrap. So I rented a hot desk in Dogpatch Labs in the IFSC there for 200 quid a month, and based myself there, made myself get out of the house and go into town and sit at a desk and map things out, sketch it all out, that type of thing. And then at some point, I invited Philip Farrell, who I knew for a number of years.
I know Philip, yeah.
And Philip was CEO of Real Estate Alliance, and previously to that, he was involved in his family's estate agency business in Newbridge. But he had left that a number of years prior. He was writing a column in the Sunday Independent, and I knew that he was, a trusted independent individual, but also who knew the industry in Ireland very well. And I wanted to make sure that I was building something that the industry would be really interested in, that was genuinely going to solve a problem for them. Because, it was back some time before since I was working in HOK, Savills, that was real traditional industry stuff. But it was over a decade prior. So, things had moved on, and my whole world was auction for so long. I was had the auction goggles on.
Nuances could have gotten in the way.
Yeah. So when it came to the auction piece, I was all over that, no problem. But when it came to the more traditional piece, that was where Philip's help was very important. And then through an Enterprise Ireland program that I went on, New Frontiers program, I was introduced indirectly to Neil Dawson, and Neil had been the head of technology for a number of successful tech businesses, many of them founded by Ray Nolan. And so Neil was consulting. I ran the project past him. He was interested. We chatted it out, and so Neil came on board then, and has overseen the build of the entire system. And so that's our founding team, and we've since grown on. We've done 2 fundraisers, and we've grown the team now, and we're launching it in several different countries. So it's been a bit of a roller coaster few years.
I can imagine. And I'd like to get into that. But before we do, I wanted to just ask you, some of the mindset shifts that you've gone through. This process, as you say, it's a roller coaster. And as part of that, you would have experienced kind of successes and failures and sort of realizations that, oh, okay, this is not the path I need to go. What have been the biggest kind of mindset shifts that you've noticed in the last, 2 or 3 years?
Certainly had a few of them, all right. Well, I do remember when I was contemplating leaving BidX One, and as I say, I had nothing to complain about. I had a great setup there. And actually, Steve had asked me, would I move abroad and help set BidX One up in outside of Ireland? We were looking at the UK and South Africa and a few other countries. So it was an exciting opportunity. But I had this yearning inside me that I wanted to set up my own business and kind of be my own boss and all that kind of stuff that goes with that. And I took myself off to France for 5 days just to go to drive around a little bit. I remember I was sitting opposite Connor Fenn, one of my colleagues at the time. We were chatting, and I said, "God, I'd like to go away." So why don't you go to La Rochelle? You can get a Ryanair flight there. I was like, "Oh, I've never been." So right there on the spot, I just booked a Ryanair flight to La Rochelle. I had no accommodation booked. I flew over, had 5 days. The only plan I had was I wanted to get to the Dordogne area where good friends of my mum and dad had retired to a sort of a little farmhouse there and had little cottages that they rent out. So I was going to drive there and spend a few days. So I ended up arriving into La Rochelle the exact same week that all of Paris holidays in La Rochelle, so couldn't find accommodation
14th
anywhere.
of July.
I think it was, yeah, well, funny enough, it wasn't Bastille Day, no, but it was first or second week of August is sort of a big time there.
Yeah.
And the only thing that was available was a boat in the harbour. So I booked the boat to sleep on for the first 2 nights, saw everything that I could see there. But the whole time I was thinking and thinking, but I had also brought a fantastic book called The Future of the Professions by a father and son lawyer team in the UK. It's not a sort of a self-help book. It's about how technology is shaping the professions, from medicine to law to accountancy to architecture, and how it's having massive impacts. And I was convinced that this could definitely apply to the property industry. So anyway, I was reading the book the whole way along, and the 5 days went by, and I drove down a beautiful little drive through the country roads and got to Bergerac. Had a glass of Bergerac in Bergerac, had a glass of Bordeaux in Bordeaux, had a glass of cognac in Cognac all along the way. It all sounds very, very fantastic, but the whole thing was on a shoestring budget. And I drove back after the 5 days back to La Rochelle, and I flew home. And on the plane back, I had just finished the last page of the book, and I said, "Yeah, okay, I'm going to do this." So then on the Monday, I went in and I sat down with Steve. So that was that was the final push I needed. I had to convince myself of it, but that was kind of what inspired that. And then equally, you make mistakes along the way. I hadn't a clue, I really, I'd never done this before. I'd only ever worked for somebody, and I'd only ever worked in companies that we had resources. You have finance, you have IT, you have marketing, you
have people to fix your computer when it doesn't work.
Yeah, and payroll needs to be done, all these kind of things. Everything. I had to do everything from scratch. Even just creating my own brochures, I did them myself, all that kind of stuff. So you had to learn very, very quickly. But one of the mistakes I definitely made was when I had the idea and I had mapped it all out and I knew exactly what we were going to do when we were in the process of building it. I definitely left it too late to go and talk to the industry who I was going to actually be selling it into. My head had been filled by people telling me, "Oh my God, everyone's going to steal your idea. Everyone's going to steal your idea. Don't tell anyone. Don't tell anyone." But actually, people aren't interested in stealing people's ideas. They're far too busy with what's going on in their own lives.
And the execution is the biggest thing at the end of the day.
Yeah. So what I could have saved myself probably 6 months was going and talking sooner and more often to the people I will be looking to actually sell this product to.
Customers,
customers, and getting their involvement and getting them, because two things would have happened. It might have changed slightly some of the aspects of the product, but also, from a human level, when someone is looking at a solution coming to them, if they already have got to know the person, if they've already got a certain familiarity with it, it's less of a leap of faith for them when it comes along. It's like, "Oh yeah, oh great, you've done exactly what we were talking about. I'd love to try it out." Whereas if you're kind of coming flash bang with the finished article and it's the first time, it takes time for people to trust you, to trust the product, to trust, potentially disrupting their own business that they have built with their own hands for a while to bring something new in. So going like that with a flashbang new thing that's something I would do differently. I would have involved the industry much earlier on. Now, everything is fine. Thankfully, the product was very well received, but it probably took 6 months longer as a result of that. So that's just something
that's a great insight, because I over the years I've kind of been like an advisor to various people who are coming along, and the biggest turn off is when somebody whips out the piece of paper that's the NDA, the non-disclosure agreement. Oh, I'd like you to sign this before I tell you anything. And it's a blanket no for me. It's just like, listen, if you don't want my help, it's perfectly fine. I'm not signing a document. This is me, offering my time to you. I'm not signing a document. And so many people I've seen make that mistake. They kind of think the paranoia is there that if I show this, if I show even the name of the business, like somebody's going to go off and register the domain, and they're going to do this and that, and they're going to whip all my greatest ideas away. So
I know, yeah, and I mean, I'm sure there's a catalog of evidence of incidents that has happened, but it's a teeny tiny list compared to the vast number of businesses that continue on without that, and the NDA is at our stage in our business now, when we have a big complex system built and we're looking to maybe integrate with another big complex system, then NDAs are very appropriate, right? Because you're getting an engineering team talking to another engineering team.
Of course. And they're getting sight on your numbers as well, potentially, and things like that,
Yeah, exactly. Business models and things like that. So that's appropriate. But I would agree it's not as needed. And I didn't certainly, and I spoke to, I've got over 30 investors in the business, large and small, and we've spoken to countless companies and people and mentors and potential investors, and it's something that is not something that needs to be worried about.
Yeah, no. In terms of just you mentioned bootstrapping, and can you give us just that first couple of months? You're saying you were doing basically everything yourself. In terms of like the lessons that you've learned from starting up a business from scratch, like how would you do it differently? I mean, you've already mentioned you would have spoken to your customers earlier, but is bootstrapping the way to go? Would you have preferred to have gone out and brought in, a funding partner or something like that?
So I think I probably gave the wrong impression. We probably were more like the latter. So when I say bootstrapping, I meant really just initially myself. When I was starting off, I just had my own savings that I was using, because you leave the job, the income's gone immediately. Salary's gone next month. There's no arrival into the bank account. So that was really more of what I was saying. But I think I definitely went down the funding route earlier than other companies I've seen who have bootstrapped as long as they can.
Right.
So I can probably say more as I think it has worked in our favor, as opposed to something I would look to change. But I would encourage people maybe to do something similar. So what I mean is, initially I had a certain amount of funds myself, my own savings, and that got me through. I put half of my savings into the business directly as a cash transfer into the new bank account, and the other half was just to support myself in the absence of any sort of income.
Yeah.
And then, my two co-founders also, contributed financially to be able to keep the product in development, but we knew we had to raise money. So at that stage, we had already started conversations about raising money. I was introduced to Hugh O'Neill of Hogan and Associates, accountancy firm there in Farnham that do a lot of work in fundraising, and showed the idea. We worked with Hugh to decide how much we needed to raise, what sort of outlay did we need to have, and what sort of income did we expect. And Hugh introduced me then to Maurice Roach, the managing partner of Delta Partners, an Irish VC firm there based in Leopardstown. And Maurice liked the idea. One of the things Maurice said to me, and he was right. He said, "Yeah, that's great. So you need to raise $500,000, right? Yeah, okay. You need to raise $1 million." So it was
straight away. He figured it out. Of
doubling it immediately, which I thought, and other people had said that to me. Whatever you think you need to raise, double it, because that's the cheapest money you'll ever raise, in a way, because of the fact that it's being raised based on a hope and a promise, as opposed to future money is going to have to be raised based on performance and figures and things like that. So raise as much as you can initially, so as you can buy a lot more time to get the figures up, and deal with any eventualities that you don't see coming that could affect your future valuation. So at that stage, we fast forward, we closed €1 million
Did you have to give
round.
away a lot of equity for that initial
There was a
injection?
pre-money. No, it was about, just under 30% equity, which we were happy to live with.
It put a
So
value on the business of about 3 million, so or thereabouts. Or
yeah, exactly. And that was based on, I suppose you might say, the experience of the founders, and we had good experience in the various sectors. So Philip and I had the solid property experience. We had a good set of contacts and clients who had given us verbal confirmation that they would use the product, which is what the investors needed to see. And then Neil, with his technical abilities, gave us fantastic tech credibility, which is often a huge issue. Founders typically come from either within the industry that they're looking to provide the solution, or they're coming from the tech background with a great product for an industry that they see something that could benefit from it. And most companies that I've come across now, and as you can imagine, I've gone through various founder funding sessions and accelerator programs, both international and at home. And most companies come from one or the other in the early stage.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge thing, is get both the industry and the technical expertise on the founding team from the outset. I think that really is so important.
I've heard that multiple times. Yeah, every time I've brought on a venture capital person, it's exactly what they say, is that get your technical co-director or your technical co-founder on board right from the word go.
If you're not technical, equally vice versa. If it's a fantastic programmer that has created a brilliant product and is trying to get it into an industry, get an industry
co-founder.
But in as a co-founder, not even just as a consultant or as somebody who kind of advise, because they'll only be half interested or providing a few introductions, that type of thing. So that's certainly something worth doing.
Can you describe what Offer does for anyone who's just not familiar with it?
So it's an online bidding and online transaction tool to speed up property transactions, make them really fast, really efficient, and very transparent. So when it comes to property transactions, whether it's residential or commercial, they're very, very slow. It's extremely old-fashioned. It's very paper-based. It's managed by a huge industry that has not changed in a long, long time. And then for a good reason, as in, it's a solid industry that people need professionals and you need to be trusted. They're huge financial transactions. And the residential space, they are the largest transactions of most people's lives. So therefore, it's not something you enter into lightly. But unfortunately, as a result of that, you might say conservatism and care that is put into it, and fear and nervousness, it has meant that technology has not had much of an impact on the industry.
It's lagged behind,
Yeah. So, for example, in Ireland, which is where Offer was launched, but we're in multiple different countries. But in Ireland, it takes on average over 6 months from when a property first goes on the market to when the completion funds arrive, and that makes it a very illiquid market and very stressful for everybody involved. So what Offer does is it sits as a little widget, a little button on an estate agent's website on all their properties, and it allows anyone who's interested, if they are directed to the page or if they find the page themselves, they tap on the button and up pops the offer panel. And this is where you can see other offers that are on the property. You can register your own interest, but you can do a whole host of things before even deciding to submit your own offer. You can book viewings directly into the agent's calendar. You can watch virtual tours. You can access the legal documents. So a big area that we have focused on is bringing forward the preparation of legal documents sooner, if not prior to the property even going on the market, and making them available through a data room. This allows for faster, more informed offers, but it also allows for faster exchanges once an offer is accepted. And then you register your offer. And to register an offer, you have to upload your photo ID and in a lot of cases, your proof of funds. That's checked by the agent, and then you're allowed to submit your offer. But you have control over submitting your own offer. And once you submit an offer, it's formally recorded. You get an email dated and timestamped with the offer amount and your conditions. There can never be any dispute or claim that your offer was not passed on to the vendor or anything like that. The vendor gets notified of all offers also. And there's an audit trail of everything. So it just gives that sort of comfort and transparency, but it's very smartphone friendly. So the little widget pops up in the shape of a smartphone. So if you're on your phone or your laptop or your tablet, you can instantly use it like an app. It feels like an app without having to
Right.
actually download an app from the App Store. So it speeds up processes, but it also opens up the market to anybody around the world. So time zones don't matter. We've seen a lot of international uh, buyers placing offers on property that are not in their country because it's easy and quick to do so.
Yeah.
And we're
Wow.
and we're working on some developments to serve it up in the native language of the person, depending on the country they're coming in from. So if you had an agent in London, say, who was selling an apartment in London, and you had a buyer in France and a buyer in Hong Kong, each interested in the property, when they log onto the website, even though the website is a UK website, it'll be served in their native language. So
Wow.
there's some other innovations that we're working on. So that's the idea, is to provide fast property transactions, to make it as easy as booking a flight. That's sort of the analogy I like to use.
That's really, I mean, I can see, we were talking earlier about making it as frictionless as possible. And that sounds like super slick and frictionless.
But I'll give you a little anecdote that helped, I suppose, again, cement in my mind that there was an appetite for this. It was back when I was in BidX One and we were doing the online auctions. And I remember I was getting a sandwich on Bagot Street, and my phone rang, and it was a gentleman who I had never actually spoken to before, but he said he had bought 2 properties in the online auction a little while ago, but the contracts were all signed, was all done, but the completion was just taking time. And he was wondering, was there anything I could do, any call I could make to help out? And I said I'd see whatever I could do, no problem. But I asked him, I took the opportunity. I said, look, do you mind me asking, how did you find the online auction? It's great to be able to chat to somebody who's bidding or has successfully bid. He said, oh yeah, great, no problem, enjoyed it. In fact, he said, I'll tell you where I was. I was sitting on an airplane, taxiing on the ground in Heathrow Airport, waiting for my flight to take off to Dublin. I said, really? He said, yeah, I was. The flight was delayed, so we were still on the ground. I knew I had registered to bid, so I took out my phone, and while everyone else, was, texting home or checking their Facebook feed, he spent, I think, over €500,000 in a few minutes,
Wow.
and so that was fine. He put the phone back, before he did any more damage, and he took off. And an hour later, he landed in Dublin. And when he turned on his phone, he said when he checked his email, signed contracts were already in his inbox, all
Wow.
exchanged, all done. Property was now his, and he was blown away by this. In fairness, he said, "Look, I'm 20 years buying property. I am a regular property buyer and investor." He said, "I've never seen anything this quick and easy." He said, "I wish I could buy all my properties this way."
Yeah. Wow.
And I realized, I said, "Look, that I don't know how this has to happen, but that is the future of buying a property. If you can
For
go
sure.
through if you can go through the entire process from start to finish and not leave your airplane seat, that's the way it should be done." So that's the goal within Offer.
That's the vision. Wow. I
Yeah.
can really see that actually, and making it that simple, and that free flowing and slick. I mean, in gosh, yeah, really. I mean, the speed of that. Is it just residential property, or is it like any kind of property now at this stage?
So it's pretty much all kinds of property. So we have a commercial property product that is very similar, slightly different as regards commercial agents will get into a lot more detail about prospective buyers. And so we've built a system whereby the agent can customize the data that they collect. So, for example, if a large investment is being sold, say it's a shopping center, and there's 100 tenants and 100 leases. So you've got a big data room hosting all of the legal documents.
Mm.
That's quite standard now in commercial deals, but that's provided as part of our system. But then equally, as people are registering their interest, whether it's to download the documents or whether it's to submit a formal bid for the property, you do a lot more due diligence around what company are they looking to buy it through. Is it a personal investment, or is it a pension fund, or is it a company, or is it, for example, an SPV? So if it's a special purpose vehicle that's been set up to buy a property, you need more DD there, because of course, if there's a default, you've no assets to go after if it's an SPV. Whereas if it's a large company with assets, then at least you can sue for specific performance and all sorts of things like that. But as regards the process, it's there for commercial property, and we're working with some great names like Cushman and Wakefield in 3 different countries, and we're working with some of the great commercial companies in Dublin as well. Savills, Knight Frank, CBRE,
Mm-hmm.
Cushman and Wakefield, Colliers have all had fantastic successes with the system, and we're delighted to have them as customers. And well, certainly in the early stages, but we're looking to grow grow the commercial side of things. On the residential side, we are soon to release a new product, which is lettings, and we are also have a new homes product, so allowing fast single touch sale of new homes within developments, which would be great for first time buyers. So yeah, watch this space.
Wow, exciting stuff. I was going to ask you what's exciting. What are you excited about in the future? But you've kind of gone through your roadmap there, and it sounds really interesting.
I think the biggest challenge for us is that, because we are now a pure tech company, and I come from a property background, so I understand the property industry, and not everything happens instantly. For me, of course, I want everything to happen, tomorrow, as opposed to next month or next year. And the industry is a very conservative industry. It's a very traditional industry. It takes its time before making big changes, which is understandable given the size of the transactions involved. So we just have to try to sort of shape ourselves around the industry and know the industry that you're selling into. So I used to get frustrated initially because I wanted everybody to sign up now and all properties be going through digitally, but it just takes time. And so there's a bit more hand holding, there's a bit more explaining, there's a bit more, being with the customer right through the journey.
Yeah.
Even in the first year of using the system, that type of thing. But the exciting thing for us is, we closed a big funding round last year, a 3 million round with Barclays Bank in London on board as an investor. And we recently took on board the National Association of Realtors in the US via their venture arm called Second Century Ventures. And that was by way of a program they're running called the REACH program, which is in the UK and in the US. And we'll be very excited about a roadmap to the US with the assistance of the NAR. So that's happened in the last few months.
That's interesting. Yeah, I had one of their entrepreneur in residence on the podcast a few months ago, a guy called Duke Long. And
chatting to Duke a couple of weeks ago. He's a great guy. Yeah,
great guy. I can't remember what episode, but I did a podcast with Duke last year. Robert, we're coming towards the end of the chat. I was just going to ask you, one of the questions I ask all of my guests is, knowing now what you know, if you had an opportunity to, whisper some advice into the ear of a young Robert, what advice would you give yourself?
Oh, I think I would say, move faster, act quicker. Don't be so worried or paranoid about various things happening or going wrong or things like that. I am natural risk taker anyway. I'm not an overly conservative person, but I think if I could go back, all the things I've done, I think I could probably do quicker, and not cut corners, because that has a negative impression, but not sweat the finer details so much. As my older brother always says to me, done is better than perfect. I often was very perfectionist about trying to get everything right, and the prospectuses we draw up and all the marketing material. I suppose coming from a property background, you always want everything to be very glossy and excellent, but you tend to maybe take too long over it. So I think I would just, don't be nervous, don't be afraid, just act quickly, go for it, just absolutely go for it, like full on
urgency.
Make mistakes, make mistakes, and then learn from the mistakes, as opposed to trying to avoid all the mistakes.
Great advice. Well, Robert, thank you so much. If anyone wanted to learn more about you or offer, what's the best place to find you?
Yeah, sure. The website is offer.io, OFFR.io. I'm available on my email, robert.hoban@offer.io, anytime. So that's probably the best way to catch me. Yeah, or on LinkedIn. Easy on LinkedIn.
Okay, I'll put some links in the show notes. But Robert, it's been a great pleasure. Enjoy working with you or talking with you today. And I'm actually going to go on, have a look at Offer now today, and just have a look at some of the product development. Thanks so much, Robert.
Enjoyed the chat, Gavin. Pleasure.
All right, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Robert. Now, remember, this industry is evolving very quickly. And you got to ask yourself the question, are you moving with the times, or are you resisting the change, resisting the digital transformation of this industry? And I want you to go away and have a think about that, and just ask yourself, are you actively looking for ways to remove the friction from your business. If you're renting to tenants, do you make it as friction free as possible? Can they just simply click a button on the phone and it's done? Can they pay you just like that? Can they do pay their deposit or whatever needs to be done? Viewing of property, all of that should be as friction free as possible, and you will benefit from that. I strongly believe that to be the case anyway. So I hope you enjoyed the episode of Behind the Facade this week. Thank you so much for listening. As always, my number one ask is for you to leave a review or indeed share this episode out with somebody you think would benefit from it. In the show notes, you're going to find links to Robert's LinkedIn profile, to offer.io, to, I guess I'll put BidX1 in there as well, and I'll also put Robert's email as he does mention it in today's podcast. If you have any questions or topics you'd like me to cover in future episodes, please connect with me via the Facebook group Behind the Facade Community. There's been a good uptick in the number of members joining lately, and so I would love it if you would join me in there. And as I did recently, I did my 1 hour sort of free talk for members of that group, and it was a kind of I suppose you call it a free training or like a webinar type thing, but I just went into a lot of the lessons I've learned over the years, and I will be doing another one of those in the next week or two. And so that is going to be called the Elite Property Hour, and if you're interested in learning more about that, please reach out to me on my social media. Gavin J. Gallagher is the handle I use for pretty much everything, and that includes my YouTube channel. And lastly, if you want to stay up to date with the various things I'm working on, please head over to my website, gavinjgallagher.com/go, and you can click on a button there to add your name to the email list. All right, folks, that's all for now, and I hope to see you all again next week.